And a very warm welcome to another Yarra Valley Writers Festival New Release Sunday, where we get to meet an Australian author and their work. This week, the acclaimed author of Jasper Jones, Craig Silvey, with his new book, Honeybee. A beautiful story about identity and the transformative power of friendship found just at the right time. Today, Craig's in conversation with the excellent writer and journalist, Rick Morton. Hope you enjoy it.
Thanks so much for that, Michael. I don't think I need to do any more introductions because Michael's done that for us now. And this feels redundant, but Craig Silvey, this book is phenomenal on every single level. I was bawling my eyes out when I finished it the other day, which I think is a gift. It really is. Did you expect that you'd get that reaction so soon?
Well, first of all, I'm touched and moved by your response, Rick. I really appreciate that. The truth is, it was quite a moving book to write. It hasn't been the case in my career where I've been crying at my desk, but I have to say, I had more than one occasion in writing Honeybee that I felt really wrung out emotionally. And a lot of scenes were difficult to sit inside some days. A lot of scenes were a real joy to sit inside. And I wanted to expand them and just sit inside that world. So there are a lot of emotional dynamics at play. But at the heart of it, I think there's a very vulnerable person who we just hope the best for. Someone who is quite raw and unbidden. And I think we just feel so intimately connected to Sam, so I share that response as the creator. It was an unusual situation for me as a writer to feel so powerfully connected to these characters.
Well, because I don't write fiction, so I always wonder how that works. But certainly, without too many parallels, but I saw enough of myself in Sam, in the protagonist. And you write about trauma and, I guess, penury so well, but I don't think that's your background necessarily. What was your childhood like?
Yeah, my childhood was mixed. I certainly haven't experienced any of the difficulties or challenges that someone like Sam Watson has faced. And so in writing Honeybee, it wasn't necessarily tapping into my own history. I'm acutely aware that Sam's story doesn't emerge from my own lived history. It requires a great deal of empathy on my part, I suppose, to try to appreciate emotionally what Sam is going through. However, at the beating heart of Honeybee owes to it the consultative process that underpinned my methodology in writing Honeybee, because in wanting to capture that experience, that is so far removed from my own history. That is growing up young and trans or gender diverse in Australia. What it required of me was to listen and to learn and to avail myself of testimonies. Not only did I feel as though that was the correct ethical framework with which to approach this story, but it was a requirement for the narrative itself. And so I essentially collected testimonies, be they publicly accessible online, through websites and blogs and forum posts and video logs. We live in an incredible age where some very brave and inspiring people have volunteered their histories and their experiences for people like me to read and appreciate. But more so, it was connecting with support networks like Trans Folk of WA and meeting with trans and gender diverse people, all of whom I feel so grateful for, because they offered me the privilege of their time and their histories and their experiences. And in that sense, it was quite collaborative. I couldn't have written Honeybee without the contributions of those people or those testimonies. as it relates to descriptions of dysphoria or Sam's gender identity, I left nothing to invention. Everything is informed by that research and reportage. So in that sense, it's a chorus of voices that have sculpted Sam Watson.
I'm really impressed by that level of detail that because I've got lots of friends in the queer community. I'm gay myself. I'm not trans, but just speaking to people about their lives and their upbringings, it's so on point, I think. And, I think it's masterful the way you've actually done that. It's really quite beautiful.
Oh, I appreciate that, Rick. In wanting to capture the emotional complexities, of course, I tried to access how that might feel and to recapture moments where I felt isolated or alienated growing up. But of course, to imbue that with the testimonies of so many people, but also to ensure that Sam is a fully realized, authentic person. Sam's gender identity informs a large part of her character and a large part of the conflict and the struggle that she encounters in Honeybee. However, it is part of a broader narrative. So there are other elements of Sam that, by virtue of me being a novelist, I was able to develop and explore. And so in that sense, I felt very, very intuitively connected to Sam, I suppose.
I'll get into some broader discussions in a minute, but I think part of what I think you did so well for her character is that you introduced Aggie, the friend, who is hilarious. Like, I actually laughed out loud multiple times reading her because I see her in so many people. I think it's wonderful. But she sees Sam like, I think, as a full rounded person, which is what the character is. And I love, she says about Sam what so many kids who come from backgrounds of disadvantage or trauma have in their pocket, which is resilience, which is an overused word, but they've got adaptable skills and they know how to survive, and they think, they're chaotic good. They're chaotic good, which is what she says about Sam. So I love that you kind of built that in. Did that, you must live with these people, right? You walk around with them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Some characters take a little more time to develop than others. So a character like Vic, for example, was a little slower to unfurl. It takes you a little bit longer to understand them, to work out who they are. However, a character like Aggie just burst onto the page, and from the first moment I knew who she was and what she was about and how she was going to express herself. And you feel very fortunate sometimes as an author to be kind of blessed with those characters. But you're right. I think Aggie immediately sees something in Sam that is just pure and lovable, and she just sweeps Sam up into her life in such a comforting and welcoming way. And I think what Aggie, as well as the Honeybee's fleet of supporting characters, and I mean that in a most literal sense, I think what they offer Sam is perspective, an opportunity to see herself as she truly is. Because when we are isolated and when we are alienated, and when we are in periods of self-doubt and self-loathing, we tend to sort of enmesh ourselves in toxic narratives that don't necessarily represent who we are. And often it's people who love us, who support us and understand us, who can offer us the truest sense of maybe who we are. And so you mentioned Aggie describing Sam as chaotic good. It was a really amusing thing. It was a lovely thing for Aggie to do, to create this kind of character sheet from Dungeons and Dragons for Sam. But it's actually, it catalyzes a development for Sam and seeing herself as she truly is. She almost feels separate to the person that Aggie sees. And so it's a really important moment for her development to think, well, maybe I am admirable. Maybe I am a good person. Maybe I am worth loving and saving.
I think that's quite beautiful. I was only looking up last night how old you were, Craig, which hopefully isn't offensive, although it is offensive now because are you still 38 now? Or
I am still 38. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So that means
yeah.
you wrote Jasper Jones when you were in your mid-20s, I take it. That's incredible. I was thinking back to my mid-20s and I was not doing very much with my time back then. You really got started very early on the scene, and then there's been an 11-year gap. Can you walk me through that process? Was there pressure? Obviously, Jasper Jones was your second book, but it was your most high selling. So what happens when you do a Jasper Jones and then take an 11-year break? I know it's not really a break.
Yeah, look, the truth is that that Jasper Jones had the privilege of a trajectory that was and remains quite astonishing. It certainly exceeded my expectations, and it invited a lot of readers, and continues to be widely read. And what that afforded me was the opportunity to tour the world, speaking to people about it, becoming something of an ambassador for the story. And so I spent a couple of years essentially doing that as a touring writer. Had quite a protracted release. 2 years after its release in Australia, it came out in places like Spain and Germany, these places. So it was a real joy to connect with readers from all over the world. But there was a point where I just had to stop and go back to that private world of writing. And I spent a couple of years working on a piece of historical fiction, which was set here in Western Australia, about a really remarkable group, actually, called the Ugly Men's Volunteer Workers Association. Really fascinating part of Western Australian history. And unfortunately, as a researcher, I am hopelessly inquisitive. So I would lose weeks at a time just to reading too many things about, I don't know, from combine harvesters to the history of carnivals and, all sorts of things, none of which were really germane to the text itself. But it just got really big on me and I kind of lost its central thread and I was starting to worry that it wasn't quite working. And after a couple of years, the opportunity to write the screenplay for Jasper Jones came up, and I knew that I risked losing this novel if I signed on to write the adaptation. And that's what happened, really. So it's in the bottom drawer. I've got 400 pages just sitting there. But I'm glad that I did, because working on the film was one of the most remarkable, rewarding experiences of my life. It was amazing, absolutely incredible.
And I noticed you thanked Rachel Perkins in the acknowledgements of Honeybee, so you obviously feel very close.
Yeah, she's one of the most remarkable people on the planet, Rachel. She's just relentlessly talented, has a brilliant mind, incredibly generous and collaborative. And I think her body of work speaks for itself. But you won't meet a more generous person. And we're working with each other again. I've written a western, a screenplay for a western, actually set in Kalgoorlie over here, which we're developing together. So yeah, I fell in love with film and spent a couple of years developing screenplays, and then Honeybee took my life over.
When did Honeybee take your life over? When did this kind of seed get planted?
Yeah, to tell you that, I'd have to give, I suppose, maybe the audience a little bit of context about the book itself, and then maybe describe the genesis
from yourself about what you see this story as being.
Yeah. Well, the elevator pitch, I suppose you'd call it, would be that Honeybee is a story about Sam Watson, who is a trans teen who we meet late one night in the southern suburbs of Perth as she steps onto a quiet traffic bridge in the middle of the night and climbs over the rail and looks down at the road below. And her intention is to end her life. And at the other end of the bridge is an old man. His name is Vic, and he is smoking his last cigarette, and he's there to end his own struggle. But the two see each other across the void, and it changes their fates, and they meet. And Honeybee is, among other things, about the relationship that blooms between the two of them, and the efforts that they make to repair each other. And so the genesis of the story actually stems from a real event. Many years ago now, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, my brother was picking up his partner from the airport and he was driving her home to Fremantle. And as he crossed the Canning Highway overpass, through the corner of his eye, he saw a young person who was standing on the wrong side of the rail and they were precariously poised. And so he pulled over immediately and called the police, while my sister-in-law, whose name is Sam, she got out of the car and approached this young person just to distract them, really, while help was on the way.
Yeah.
And so after he called the police, my brother contacted me, and I was at home and at the office working, and I was immediately heartbroken and concerned and worried, and I continued to receive updates. And so my sister-in-law approached this young person and talked about everything and nothing, really, until they volunteered the reasons why they were there. And the truth is, they were struggling with issues surrounding their gender identity. They'd been kicked out of home because they'd lost the support of their family and their friends. They were alone in the world, and they were in an anguished, hopeless, helpless place. Then the police turned up, and they were quite brusque, very businesslike. They grabbed this young person, dragged them over the rails, and deposited them in the back of an ambulance. Thinking about this young person, we were worried about them. And so we tried to reconnect. But unfortunately, they had a very common name. And so they proved to be elusive. We couldn't find them. And so I was left with quite a curious situation in that I had a very real concern for a very real person with a very real and urgent predicament, but they existed entirely in my imagination. You know, I hadn't met them. And I kept thinking about them, thought about them a lot. And I had questions to ask them. I wanted to understand them better. I wanted to understand the forces and the pressures that had led them to that place on that night. And so that's when I started reading. That's when I started listening. That's when I started availing myself of testimonies. I was heartbroken by a lot of what I read, and I was alarmed by many of the statistics that I encountered. And it was that point that I recognized that the challenges, the risks, the threats faced by young trans and gender diverse people in Australia is an urgent crisis. And what I wanted to do in embarking upon Honeybee as a narrative was to honor that person on that night, not to tell their story, because it's not mine to tell, but to honor them by developing Sam, by telling Sam's story, Sam's very specific story, which is specific to her experience and her time and place. But what I wanted to also offer was hope, a way out. How could that person find a pathway to betterment and self-actualization and a more optimistic place? And that was part of what motivated me, or gave me momentum in writing Honeybee.
I think, yeah, I mean, that is such a, I mean, do you hope that this person might still be out there and might get in contact if they see these, the press for Honeybee? Is that something you thought about?
I think it would be a really remarkable outcome if they recognize themselves out of some of the conversations emerging from Honeybee. Obviously I would never declare their name publicly or give any or remark on anything that would
identify
potentially betray their privacy. However, if they recognized enough in that story to come forward, we just want to check in and see if they're okay and offer our support and our love. I think that would be a wonderful outcome. Yeah.
In the course of all the research that you were doing for this book and talking and reading those testimonies, did you, I mean, I don't know who you were before you started this book, but do you yourself think that you changed as a person, or that your worldview opened up? Even in kind of queer circles, it takes a lot of effort for people like myself to really understand where people are coming from. And we never really will. But I just want to know, what was your personal journey like along that way?
Yeah, I think it was quite profound. I think by virtue of the fact that when we learn about other people and other lives, be that through fiction or be that through being an open and empathetic person, somebody who listens, it enriches us, but it changes us. It gives us a better perception of where we fit into the world, and how other people navigate the world. And so I think I got a much better understanding of the privilege that I have. I don't navigate the world with the same pressures and threats as somebody like Sam, as members of the trans and gender diverse community. And I acknowledge that this is a privilege that I have and that it is unjust and it's unfair. And, I pledge my alliance to the movement and the fight to bring things into balance. Once you learn the difficulties faced by a marginal group or an oppressed group or people who are struggling, it changes you. And so I suppose my commitment to being a good ally has been sharpened. I'd always had an empathy for difficulties faced by people in the LGBTQI space. However, I did not, and I'm still learning. My engagement doesn't end now that I've written the book. In fact, it's blossoming, given the people that I've had the privilege of meeting, the messages that I'm receiving. My connection with somebody like Alice Shotty from Transfolk of WA. I think it's inspired me to be the best ally that I can be. So that means continuing to listen, continuing to examine my own behavior and to encourage other people to do the same. Little things like Transfolk of WA have these really wonderful tips to be a good ally cards, and we're handing those out at signing queues and, putting them in with every copy of Honeybee, just to have that dialogue and to encourage people to go through a similar process that I have. That's changed me quite profoundly, and it's something that I feel very committed to.
And I also, something I have far more experience with personally is the drag community, which is just a heck of a lot of fun, really.
Yeah.
Certainly on the surface anyway. I need to know, did you get to perform in drag when you were walking through this world and trying to figure out how it worked, or were you just there as an observer?
I can assure you, Rick, I just observed, and although I did, okay, so, well.
Sorry, but.
So I did enlist I've always loved drag. I love it.
Yeah.
It is riotous and satirical and subversive and rebellious and fun. It's countercultural. It's just endlessly entertaining to me. I love it. But I did want to capture the idiosyncrasies of Perth drag. And so I did enlist a couple of local queens to, take me through the scene and sort of tell me the gossip and the patois, some local terms for things, and so I learnt all the different places that glitter can emerge from. I watched countless makeup tutorials, but my only participation, Rick, I have to tell you, was
I think I know where this is going. But...
Right, yeah. So I did experiment with tucking.
Yep.
I did learn about putting, because I was just so fascinated. At 38 years of age, you think you haven't necessarily,
how do they do it?
That's quite right, yeah. But also just new notions of human biology, like putting the eggs in the nest, Rick. I didn't know that this was possible. And there is a little cavity to pop the potatoes into that I didn't know about. And I have to say, I gave it a shot.
Yep. How'd you go?
And indeed, up they went. I had a moment of terror where I presume maybe they might not come back down. But they made it. It's okay. But yeah, from that point, it's all about boat tape.
Yeah.
My goodness, it's a brave game.
I love
It's
that.
brave.
You really put yourself out there. I like it. And they are. I do love. I love the character of Peter or Fella Fitzgerald, which is an amazing name, by the way, in this book, because I think you captured what I certainly know of that community, which is not nearly as much as other people do, which is that they've been through the wars, and they've been there. They've come out the other side, and there is such a deep, profound compassion in the queer community, and particularly in the drag scene, that they just want to look after people who've come to them who are hurt or wounded, and you really captured that.
Oh, I appreciate that a lot. Yeah, it seems to me to be the family that you choose, and drag families. You have drag mothers who are this kind of umbrella for a house and have this brood of queens under their protection. I think it's a really beautiful notion. And like any family, there's drama and gossip, and it's not always harmonious.
No.
But at its heart is a community that protects one another, loves one another, and celebrates one another. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. And yeah, this is the process. I think when Fella Fitzgerald, and I appreciate that you enjoy that name, because coming up with new drag names, Rick, is not easy. I got to tell you that.
Say, I've been trying to think of what mine would be. I don't think I'm probably allowed to say it on here, so I won't. But I'll message it to you.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, when I came up with Fella Fitzgerald, there was a number of fist pumps. I was very happy with myself. But I think Fella sees in Sam parts of herself at that age, and just knows implicitly what this kid requires, the kind of support, the kind of relentless support that somebody who is going to kind of resist you, not trust you, requires. And so in that respect, Peter or Fella Fitzgerald is a critical character in Sam's development in Honeybee.
Have you? I do want to, just as a kind of a writer nerd, I want to kind of talk about your writing process, because it's so different for everyone. And I try to discover writers who aren't machines at their desk. But the older I get, the more I realize that is actually how writing gets done. You just have to do the work. What's your process? How do you do it? I need to know.
Yeah, it is a bit like that. For me, it's a game of patience and perseverance and determination and will and stubbornness. I always, when I was coming up, when I determined to be a writer when I was a teenager, I always thought it was Kerouac at a typewriter, and you'd have these moments of, intense creative pyrotechnics. Yeah. But it's never the case. The truth is that it's sadly about rumination and cogitation and just slowly allowing a story to unfurl and tease itself into being. And so my process generally is to work an afternoon shift of 5 or 6 hours. Then I'll break for dinner, reacquaint myself with my partner, try to relax a little bit. And then I'll have an evening session from about 9 p.m. to 1 or 2 a.m. And I'll do that 6 days a week when I'm obsessed by a novel. Yeah. So that'll be my process.
That's a big shift. Are you a morning person? Do you get up early, or?
I get up about 9 a.m. Yeah. So, not a huge amount of sleep. I can't focus in the morning, really. I have a lot of author friends who just somehow wake up feeling invigorated.
I hate those.
Clear-minded. Oh my goodness, I have such resentment for their lust for life. It's not for me. Yeah. I need to sit there and prevaricate, think about things until I feel so guilty about my lack of output that something emerges. You know, that's how it works.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. So yeah, it's nice to see another writer who's a night owl. That gives me some hope, or at least productive in the afternoon.
Yeah. I tend to believe in things more late at night. You know, I feel like my filter is a little less critical. It's very quiet, and I can kind of just let myself dream a little bit more and be more open to possibilities. I think I'm a more critical person in my afternoon shift. I'm more brutal about my writing and where things are going to go. I nurse more doubts in the afternoon, if that makes any sense.
It does, actually. I think that's quite lovely. How long does it take you to do a book like this? I mean, obviously you get the idea and you start thinking about it, but when you really commit to writing, how long are we talking?
I'd say first draft of the manuscript probably took me 2.5 years. And from that point, it was editing through Jane Pofferman and Ali Laveau, who are just brilliant structural sculptors, you know, just wonderful, incredibly clever people. Look, there wasn't too much work to do in that edit. It was more about enlivening some scenes and giving extra depth, particularly in the third act. So it wasn't a matter of restructuring or having to rip out chapters or anything like that. So that process probably took about 6 months. You know, all told, but not too much work. I'm very deliberate about what goes down on the page.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting because I've got other friends who write kind of more nebulously and then I will fix it in post. But I'm the same. I can't move on until I've got a fully formed sentence and I'm happy with. Otherwise, I'll never finish anything.
That's right. Yes, yeah. So it just it happens slower, but I think you know that's the way that the tortoise beats the hare, I think, Rick, where we actually end up doing less editing or less post-production work because the foundations of what we build maybe is a little more sure. And we have a better idea maybe of where things are going. I have friends too who write in such a way that it's almost like quilting. You know, you might do a panel up here or a scene over here and then sort of thatch them together, which seems insane to me. I couldn't conceive of writing like that. You know, it's wild behavior as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, I'm very, very determined to get things down in a linear way.
I think that would make them chaotic evil. So those people who do that,
Can't be trusted.
Yeah, that's as much as I can relate. The Yarra Valley Writers Festival audience will probably get sick of me harping on about this all the time, but I think in your book, in the previous interview I did, there's such an undercurrent of kind of distorted masculinity, not in relation to Sam or her character, but into the relation to the men around her. Vic being the best version of it in the book, really. And then you've got Steve, Sam's essentially stepfather, who is just, you know, I was getting PTSD flashbacks reading it just from my upbringing in Queensland. It's so coarse, and I don't know. Does it make you think about your own place in the world as a man when you're writing these versions of characters, and do you see parts of yourself even at the smallest degree in those characters and go, man, I do that. I should probably not do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose given that I'm a cisgendered male and writing a story that examines masculinity to a certain extent, you can't help but contrast yourself against this, you know, panoply of representation. You know, there is a lot of notions of masculinity in Honeybee, be they traditional or challenged, you know, more contemporary. It's interesting in Honeybee because masculinity is often seen as a threat for Sam. It's something to fear, and it's almost an antagonist in the text. But you're right, somebody like Vic, for example, can offer us, in the traditional sense.
Yes, I was going to say he's not perfect in a modern sense, but he is.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, some of those more admirable traits of traditional masculinity. You know, he is a protector, he's a provider, he has a huge heart, and he lives his life by a set of moral laws that are almost codified into his behavior, which inform his choices before any desire or want. That is who he is, and that is his perception on being a man. But Vic isn't without his flaws.
Yeah.
We actually learn a lot about Vic through his departed wife's diaries. Sam finds Edie's diary entries and reads them and gives us an insight into their private life. And it's a beautiful love story that they have. However, Edie describes Vic as being a rock. And, I think this is true in all senses because, he is strong and resilient and very consistent, but he's also impermeable. He doesn't express himself. And, there's such frustration that Edie has for Vic not being able to tell her how he feels.
Yeah.
And I think it's very interesting that Sam, in her relationship with Vic, actually draws the blood from the stone. Vic is more honest with Sam than with his wife. He confides in Sam. He's vulnerable with Sam, and eventually voices a devastating confession. And so, I think that brittleness of traditional masculinity meets this contemporary challenge notion and changes. I think that's interesting.
I do. I mean, so often, and even in the criticism and kind of the review world of books like this, we tend to view these narratives as only trauma narratives, or they're using trauma as a trope. But to me, I think that engages in the deficit culture. And what I see when I see Sam's story, and particularly her relationship with Vic, is I see this really rough diamond who has such a way of being in the world that she manages to completely transform this man who was unbendable beforehand. And to me, that is the hero story in this novel. And I think that, we focus too much on the deficit, I guess. It's Sam's going through these issues and she's got these huge worries, but she is an amazingly capable protagonist.
Oh, I think that's really beautifully put.
Sorry, and monologue there, but
that gives me great joy to hear because I wish that would be more so a part of the conversation that's emerging from this book, and I suppose with time it might well be the fact that Sam is a disarmingly raw and open and honest person, and such a resilient character, such a beautiful person. She offers Vic, who has given up, who has, prior to Sam's interruption of his world, felt as though that world had collapsed with the death of his wife, was grieving and saw nothing for himself. She offers Vic hope and change and redemption. And just by virtue of being herself, being the person that she truly is. I think their relationship is just fascinating. I think it's really interesting. And, she changes other characters too, but the most important change is herself, yeah.
I wanted to read you my favorite part. It's only very small, but my favorite part of the entire book is just this one-line text message that Sam sends to Aggie, because Aggie's watching the movie E.T. With her family, and her father just doesn't understand why this kid would rob scientists of the chance to learn about alien life and study the universe. And Sam is just so whip smart, and she just sends a message to Abby that says, the boy wants to help E.T. get back to his family because his own family is broken and he can't fix it. That's more important to him than the universe. And Aggie's dad kind of breaks down a bit later on and realizes that he forgot what it was like to be young. And I guess, isn't that really what vulnerability is? It's you don't lose the gift of childhood or your younger years where you know what it's like to be in the world. And I don't know if that is such a special moment for me. Did you think that when you were writing that particular line? Did you think it was important?
Yeah, I did. I think it speaks to Sam's essence, I suppose, what Sam's universe is. because, Sam grew up in quite a neglected household with a single parent who confused Sam so much by smothering her with love, then retreating and retracting it and leaving her on her own. And this is really confusing to young people. And Sam is quite isolated, quite alienated. And so she exists in the orbit of this single parent, of her mother, and cultivates this intense, toxic loyalty to Sarah, to her mother. And so in that respect, she is her universe, and spending so much time away from it, and at that stage of the book, potentially losing that, being flung out of that orbit into an entirely different place. We intrinsically understand what Sam values most of all, and what's most important to her. I mean, I actually in some respects agree with Mr. Mimaduma about E.T. I do think it's a shame that we didn't just eviscerate that little alien and work out the secrets of the universe. So I understand where he's coming from, because I am a cold-hearted cynic at the end of the day.
I mean, not at all. I think it would be lovely to know more, but you are advocating the murder of an alien. So
that's correct. That's correct. Yeah, maybe I should stop now before I
if anyone
get
watches
myself in.
This will become the headline. So that's
right.
That's
right.
So.
Intergalactic murderer, Craig Silvey.
Yeah, I mean, I get definition. So you've thought about it, obviously. That's good. About ET and what it means.
Of course, yeah.
I wanted to. I'm going to do a pivot in a minute, and I hope it doesn't take us too off track. But you mentioned earlier about this book is now out there in the world. People are starting to read it in great numbers, I assume. You're getting messages from young kids or teenagers or even young adults about their reaction to the book. But like, what are you hearing?
It's been quite astonishing. It's been very moving. I've never experienced anything quite like it. It's been quite phenomenal. The messages that I've received from young trans and gender diverse people particularly, but also from family members, from parents. On the night of the launch event here in Fremantle, I met a parent who has a trans son who stopped reading because they couldn't see themselves in any texts. And it was quite an emotional chat we had, because I understood that family has endured some difficulties. Yeah. And so I signed a book over to her son, and I heard back from her. She took it home and gave it to him, and he read it all through the night. And she went to bed and checked back in the next day, and that book, Honeybee, meant a lot. They meant a lot to them. By virtue of touring, I've met trans and gender diverse people who are buying Honeybee to give to their family, so that they can better understand what they've gone through. And I've had family members in part buy it for their trans nieces and nephews and non-binary and gender fluid family members. And so in that respect, it's incredibly gratifying that it might be bringing families closer together. But I've also heard from people across the LGBTQI spectrum who have felt displaced, who have felt misunderstood, who have experienced some of the things that Sam experiences in Honeybee, and the story has spoken to them quite profoundly, and that has meant a lot. But I've also heard from people who want to now be better allies. Yeah. And I think that's a really beautiful outcome, who are asking me, who can they connect with? How can they actualize this intention they have to give support? And those messages are continuing, Rick, and it's just been a really beautiful, really rewarding outcome for Honeybee.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, that's where change does happen through literature. I know, I come from a family that didn't really read that much, and I kind of grew up with a chip on my shoulder about it. And saying, I don't have a real job or things like that. But it does change things. And it has just this unique, specific power to really just reorient an entire worldview. And I mean, you're doing that here with this book. Could you have written anything else for this next book? You don't, there wasn't any other idea floating around that you needed to get out of your system?
No, I think, and I'm sure you feel the same, where you feel seized by a notion and it becomes all you can think about. It displaces everything else, and not just creative notions, but the real world. It takes you over, and so Honeybee has become my absolute universe for the last few years. It's curious as a writer, because you live two lives. You live a very private one, where you're developing work, and you live in a fictional universe, the one that displaces the real world and the real people in it. And you have dominion over this story, and its fleet of characters subsist inside you and emerge on the page. And then there's a point where it becomes a book.
So weird.
And you give it over. It's when that story is no longer yours, and you hand it over, and it becomes a public object, and your control in it, your control in the conversation, your control in its interpretation, it drifts away, and it's at the mercy of readers and reception. And it can be a really beautiful, rewarding process just to see what the trajectory and the journey of a book can be. And so for me, it's what gives my working life meaning, being part of that conversation and seeing what can emerge from it. And so it's gratifying to know that something that seized me so powerfully and moved me so greatly could conceivably be elicited by other people. It's part of the magic of writing and reading, I suppose.
And it really does take over a lot of your other world. I was trying to find some music from an anti-psych. And I haven't seen much around except what I listened to on Triple J Unearthed. Are you still in the band?
Look,
long gone?
Reports of me being a musician are largely overblown, I've got to tell you. Whoever put that on my Wikipedia page has got a lot to answer for. Look, I adore music and I love playing music. Unfortunately, the Nancy Sykes have sort of all drifted away to other vocations. We come from various backgrounds, professional basketball players to engineers to, but none of us at any stretch could be described as musicians.
They were good songs. They were really good songs.
No, I appreciate that.
YV is my favorite, I think. But
yeah, look, I don't think we were too bad. And I love writing songs. I love singing. I love playing music. And I certainly haven't drawn a line through that because it is so joyful. It's so immediate. It's such a good thing to do with your soul. And it nourishes you in a different way to writing, playing music is just so somatic. It just takes your body over. Whereas I think writing is just a deeper process, I think. But look, never say never, Rick. I might be all out of ideas. I might be coming out with, a solo record or something next year. Who knows? You're inspiring me.
Well, it's like, what do you choose now? Like you've got the pick of the litter, really, when it comes to creative output. Are you a visual artist as well, by any chance?
Look, never say never. No, I'm not by any stretch. No. I think the next step actually will be there are a number of producers who are very interested in Honeybee.
Yeah.
it's looking like it will potentially be a series drama.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I'll be working on adapting some episodes and maybe EPing. So that'll be in the wings quite shortly, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to, second guess, but I mean, I imagine you'll be asking that a trans actor would play the role of Honeybee.
Oh, of course, and various other roles in the story also. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we'll be casting for that. Yeah, no doubt. It will be tricky.
Yeah.
Because I mean, by the time we shoot, the person that we cast will likely probably be about 10 years old at the moment.
Yeah.
So it will require some a little bit of magic, but that's what always happens when you cast teenagers.
Yeah.
But no, that will absolutely be our emphasis. Yes.
I was, I don't ordinarily do this when I read, but I was reading Honeybee, just found this was such a wonderful visual story as well. Through the songs and the music and Edie's dresses. And I just want to see it on TV. I want to binge watch it, Craig. I don't know.
I'm working on it.
Yeah. What other do you? I mean, obviously that's going to take up a lot of time. Do you have any other projects on the boil or kind of ideas just right at the back of the consciousness?
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple. I still have these other films in development, so we'll see what emerges there, whether they need fresh drafts or moving into shooting scripts closer we get to being financed. So there'll be that happening as well. But no, I have maybe a little novel that's just percolating at the back of my head right now. I'm just working it out. I'm just seeing if there's enough there. You just tend to wait and see if there's that substantive element that just tells you there's a novel here. There's enough to explore. So I'm just ticking over a little bit. Yeah, see how we go.
Don't let me drag it out of you. I wouldn't. I wouldn't do that. How does the process work for you? I mean, do you find yourself just letting your mind wander and very occasionally latching onto something that snowballs, or is it a deliberate process that you have to actually spend time with?
It's a really strange thing to describe.
Yeah.
But often you feel as though, I don't know, where do ideas come from, Rick?
This is a conversation I want to have for an hour.
Yeah, it's strange because I think by virtue of being a reader for so long, you get an intuitive sense of what a good story is. And I think you cultivate that and sharpen it over many, many years of just existing inside narratives and that being an important part of your life. But the truth is, when you stumble across the kind of ignition point of a story, you feel like you've just been given it. You feel like, with Jasper Jones in particularly, I felt as though that story always existed, and I was just a kind of conduit for it. And I was just a lucky vessel by which that story, which felt fully formed, just kind of worked its way through me. Which can make you feel a bit like a charlatan some days, because you don't feel as though you're actively sculpting a story. You feel as though it was just always there. And I think that's when you always get the most intuitive sense that it's going to work, that you have something special, when you feel as though you've been given it, that you're not trying to push or force it into being, that it feels pure and intuitive. And so I think writing well is just about being really patient and waiting for those moments. It's a really strange phenomenon, I suppose, writing from a pure place. And I try to describe it to people as the space that you occupy when you're immersed in a novel, when you're reading, and you forget all sense of who you are and where you are and what time it is, and what appointments you might have. Everything is displaced by this story that you're locked into and you've been disarmed by. And it's a really profound exchange. It's this moment of alchemical processes that allows you to exist inside this story. And a writer has to get to that place, but they have to make it up at the same time.
Yeah.
And they have to reserve enough of themselves to record it at the same time. And so you've got to cajole and inveigle yourself into this dreamlike, meditative state in order to craft a story. in its purest sense, I suppose, if that makes any sense. And so, yeah, and so it requires patience and requires these kind of small little routines and rituals to move yourself into that place that you can occupy every day. And it gets a little easier the deeper you are into a novel. But those early stages, you're just sort of pecking at the outside of it and trying to access it. And, it can take a lot of time, but it takes more than anything, faith and belief.
So yeah, it sounds like you're almost like a Platonist. Certainly there's scientists and physicists who are Platonists who believe that mathematics is actually out there. We didn't discover it. We just found out how to talk about it. And that maybe stories are just there. And if you're lucky, you can pluck them from the ether. Yeah,
that sounds very close to what I'm describing. Yeah.
Just need to get a ticket somehow.
That's right. I feel quite good describing myself as a Platonist now, Rick. That certainly lends me some veracity.
Sorry, if there's anyone I need to apologise in your immediate family, just let me know.
No, I'll wear it very proudly.
We've got to wrap up shortly, but I'm curious about you as a young kid. I mean, did you see this life for yourself unfairly before you? Did you need to do this? Did you wake up every day just saying, I have to be a writer? Because it sounds like you're the kind of guy that might have. But
yeah, I think I certainly did from my teenage years onwards. As a kid, I just loved reading, and it was just an intuitive thing, and it was something that I could engage in on my own. It felt a bit rebellious, and I was I'm still a coward. It was something that I could do that felt very independent. And so I just loved it. And then the moment when I was a kid that I discovered that I could make things up too and give them to other people and maybe allow them to go on the roller coaster ride of a narrative was just really intoxicating.
Yeah.
And it was just something that I just practiced by virtue of the fact that it was joyful and very fun. And then when I was a teenager, I met a writer. A writer came to our school. And up until that point, writers were just like distant deities. They didn't exist for me as actual humans. And so to see one was a remarkably clarifying event. And it was at that very specific moment I knew who I was and what I was going to be and what I would work towards. And that's sculpted my life ever since.
Well, I'm glad that it happened because we are better off for it. I won't go too over the top. I'm a huge fan of your work. And it's
Thank you, Rick.
It's a real privilege to talk to you. So thank you for indulging me and the audience with my meandering questions.
No, it was absolutely my pleasure. I really adored the chat. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Well, good. Good luck with the rest of the tour. Just your luck to release a book 11 years after Jasper in the middle of a pandemic, but
I've timed it beautifully. Yeah, perfect.
At least WA seems to have succeeded now, and they've got most of their normal life back.
Yeah, it's not too bad over here. Yeah. We've been very fortunate that we could have physical events and be in a room full of readers again. And I'm looking forward to the day that we can, clink a glass together, Rick, and
hopefully next year.
Yes, that would be lovely. And maybe head to a drag show or two and make a night of it.
If you haven't been to the Imperial yet in Sydney, we'll take you.
Done.
Yeah.
It's a deal.
Thanks so much, man.
Terrific. Perhaps we're all invited to the Imperial for a drink. That would be lovely, especially for us in lockdown Melbourne. I tell you what, the stuff of dreams, the stuff that dreams are made of at the moment. And I'm so glad I heard in that beautiful conversation all that opinions about night writing as a bit of a night scribbler myself. I'm glad to have heard it. I thought I'd got it all wrong until I heard that. I certainly can't get it wrong next week because next Sunday on the Yarra Valley Writers Festival New Release Sunday, I will be talking live to no less a figure than Robert Desai about his new book, The Time of Our Lives. Renowned essayist, broadcaster and novelist Robert Desai. The Time of Our Lives, all about getting old. Well, he and I should probably know. That will be live as I speak to him. Do hope you can join us for that one. Have a lovely week. See you next time.
say